Today on the Axe Files, we cover the most axed manga to ever exist. Well, maybe that's not quite right, but there will be a lot of axes, and perhaps this is one of the most axed manga to ever axe. Full name, Ice Head Gill. Start date, June 26, 2023. End date, November 13th, 2023. Total chapters, 20. Ikkyo Hachiya is relatively new to the manga scene, with not much info out there on them. We do know that they were an assistant on 2021's Doron Dororon, another cancelled Jump title that I'm sure plenty of people are eager for me to cover at some point. After this assistant work, they then published their first one-shot, The Black Carp in the Clear Stream, or Seiryuu no Magoi in Shonen Jump Plus, in May of 2022, and more on that later on in the video. That would be all Jump would need to see apparently, as soon after in issue 30 of Weekly Shonen Jump in 2023, Ice Head Gill would be serialized. The Kingdom of Ash and Ice, also known as Great Ice, has been beset by evil liches, intent on destroying humanity as we know it. The snow falls heavier, resources dwindle, and the hero Drekisol has killed the kingdom's prince and fled in an act of ultimate betrayal. Gil-sol is the son of this murderer and was set to be executed by order of the king, but somehow he managed to flee and take refuge on Urchin Island, where we find him helping his Aunt Mela collect taxes at the beginning of this story. Ice Head Gill introduces us to a fantasy world steeped in Norse inspiration, from its weaponry, clothing, and references to different myths and creatures. I can't tell you how authentic any of it is, but it does provide an interesting setting that acts as the background of this story for our hero Gill, who, while cute, also packs a punch as he defends Urchin Island from this story's main adversary, a lich. It takes pretty much no time to jump right into the action, seeing him brandish his axe and saying his signature catchphrase, "No one can beat me when it comes to axes." His aunt, seeing that Gill is more than capable of fighting on his own, bestows upon him his father's old journal, which, along with an amulet, gives him a cryptic clue to seek relics, and with that, he's off to find the truth about why his father did what he did and where he went. It's a bit of a bloated intro with a lot going on, but things quickly slow down. The initial few chapters of Gill then see him wander around, encounter liches, and learn bits and pieces about the state of the world, and encounter some key characters who join his party, like Sana, another child in a similar spot to Gill, as they belong to an exiled clan called the Rani. The two end up in a scuffle with an old enemy of Gill's father, Ulfgard the Blood Chaser, who wields massive boomerangs, but together they take him down. Soon enough, a lich ends up taking control of Ulfgard's body though, for round 2, but a few more core cast members come in to the rescue, Greatest and his gloomy sidekick Sliz. These are two members of the Dane Royal Antlers, a group of warriors in direct service to the king, and knew Gill's father Dreki. We get a lot more info in this little arc about how the liches are taking over and how Gill's father has also been possessed by a lich, the big bad of the entire series, dubbed the One True King, which gives Gill the new goal of slaying his own father. Gill and Sana are then taken to have an audience with the king, and while he is wanted by the kingdom, his resolve to make things right and kill his own father makes some kind of impact on Greatest as well as Jeweled King Ond, the ruler of Great Ice, so Gill is allowed to live for now when Sana gets to tag along too. There is a catch though, they must both accompany the Dane Royal Antlers to the Troll Forest in order to protect it, as it's currently under attack by liches as they speak. The next arc throws us even more lore and info as we get introduced to trolls and Gill's old mentee, Idun, who is known as the Book of Wisdom as she cannot forget anything. More sidecast are also thrown at us, only to get slaughtered by the villain of this arc, the Lich Gamigin. And despite Gill's overall upbeat tone, this adventure into the Troll Forest is pretty brutal as the aforementioned sidecast die. Rest in peace Sip, you had a really cute design but you didn't really do anything. Idun also falls too, as well as Gill's axe, which is destroyed, and Sana loses multiple limbs. Gill manages to really speed up as a story after this though, as Sana is revived and takes on the role as the new Book of Wisdom, and Gill's amulet is revealed to house the relic he's been seeking this entire time, which gives him ice powers, making the name Ice Head Gill finally make sense. Look, he has ice on his head. Do you get the name now? That's why it's called Ice Head Gill. The one true king then awakens, Baal, inside Drekkisol's body, and things rush towards a climax with our cast learning that only the 4 elements being used on the gates of the underworld can stop the liches from appearing. Coincidentally though, they already have 3, with Gill, Sana, and Greatest possessing 1 each, and the final one is in the possession of Baal, the fire relic. A few more characters are introduced right towards the end, and we barely get enough time to really process them before Gill goes to fight his dad, and they have a good old-fashioned father-son spin-off where each proceeds to attack with more spins each time. Eventually, Gill outspins his father though with his 8-spin hero hunting technique, beheading him. The elements are then used to close the gates to the underworld, the endless winter on the world ends, and Gill is crowned king, with the manga ending on a big feast. Ice Head Gill is a bit of an odd cancel manga. I'd hesitate to call it the worst ever, but it certainly might be the most mediocre, and in a pretty sad way, it's not even the most axed manga to have ever been axed in a length sense, as quicker cancellations exist, as well as manga that are far worse than it. That being said, Gill still has a lot of issues which I'll dive into, and likely this cocktail of slip-ups led to its eventual downfall. Poor plotting, I feel, is a core misstep of Gill. It often feels too slow or fast, especially at the end, and I think pre its cancellation notice, it was rushing considerably, like when we get to the Troll Forest. It also introduces us to snippets of its world and characters, but I don't think they're presented in a way where we really get to sink into them, and as such, the world feels surface level and hollow. As does a lot of the main motivations. I don't think they're sold well, despite being interesting on paper, like liches taking over, Rani wanting to pardon their clan, or Gill needing to face his father. Other critiques I can imagine being lobbed at it are fights being pretty basic, and Gill's spinning attacks being repetitive. The tonal mismanagement of the story, it's often very joyous and fun with its core cast like Gill or Greatest, and then very gloomy with a lot of death. A story with these contrasting elements can totally work, but it just doesn't here, as this isn't focused on or taken advantage of for emotional effect. I'm not sure the magazine at this time is even worth noting, as Gill is pretty clearly not a manga that's firing on all cylinders. It's unfortunately half-baked with a lot of its elements, and even though other series could have ended instead of it, it was a clear weak link. While I have criticized Gill a lot here, it does have a few things going for it. Firstly, Hachiya's art and designs. On a personal level, I really like the gender ambiguity and androgyny on display. The greatest example is Greatest. I really love how they're drawn, they're so much fun. The background characters too often stand out and look cool to me as well. I really like Sip, for example, and it's a shame she just got murked with no real dialogue or things to do. Me liking the designs also extends to Sana, Sliz, Ond, and some of the liches as well. They all look really good. While I don't think the action is particularly memorable or exciting to read, the actual impacts of Gill and his spins are pretty well drawn, and I think Gill presents a decent amount of spectacle through this, as well as how its overall fantastical world is pictured. While I understand Gill as a character won't be for everyone, I find him especially endearing. He's small, cute, and fills in this jump character archetype of fun little guy like Gon from Hunter x Hunter, Shio from Whack Whack, or Gawain from Rising Impact. They're some of my all-time favourite protagonists, so he kind of slots in there with them. His expressions and little quirks, like his can't eat alone disease, are also very adorable. I also like his catchphrase, "No one can beat me when it comes to axes." It's silly and appeals to me in a meta Shonen Jump way because the jokes just write themselves. He also says it, or a variation of this phrase, about 9 times, I think, throughout the manga, if you were wondering how many times exactly he did say it. His spinnies, as I like to call them, his different spinning attacks, are quite repetitive, although there's something very fun and simple that I like, and I think that's reflective of how simple-minded and childlike a character Gill is. Throughout its story, Ice Head Gill also had a lot of interesting ideas which were tackled that I want to bring up. There's an attempt to explore death as a theme. It's appropriate as it's a Viking or Norse work. Like early on, we see how sad it is for someone to be possessed by a lich. Their body is being used in this perverse and evil way post their death. Instances like this aren't uncommon in Gill, and it does try to build up some kind of emotional angle surrounding things from time to time. Even Gill's fate is pretty tragic if you actually think about it, and we do see him crying in chapter 1 at the thought of his entire family being massacred. It doesn't sell this very well, but it is something I picked up on while rereading, which I do appreciate. I feel like this also feeds into the Ond plotline and how he's not really fit to be a leader, with him maintaining this horrible status quo and also putting out hits on literal children. People point him out to be almost corpse-like, and that's also how he treats his kingdom. It's probably the most fascinating part of the manga overall. There's even his little jester who seems to be pulling the strings from the background, though this plotline doesn't really get explored much, and ultimately it just serves to have some kind of half-baked redemption at the end, which was kind of nice, but I don't think it was that impactful. There's also the Rani people to consider, and maybe the idea of how indigenous people are mistreated or prosecuted, or just certain minorities. I don't feel like that was touched on all that much. I think Gill wanted to tackle a lot of different subjects like death, leadership, redemption, martyrdom, and yet it doesn't approach any of it with a full heart, and the cancellation also prevented it from committing to a full exploration, which is a bit of a shame. So while Gill is absolutely flawed, it has some things going for it that I especially like, and I think it is a good example of how, even if you know a work isn't great, you can still enjoy it and find value in it. But is this something I solely believe, or have others found value in Gill too? Let's check the responses for the read-along for Gill I did in the Axe Files Discord. I think one of the biggest sentiments we received this time is that Gill isn't a bad series, nor is it a particularly good one either. Countless people express this view, like Kinky, who sums it up as nothing too special but not too bad. It's neither boring or entertaining, but falls into this middle ground where it just about grabs your interest, but nothing much beyond that. Plenty of others have said very similar things as well, citing a mix of positives or negatives as to why, like it having shallow characters, Gill's catchphrase being annoying, it being generally half-baked or having rushed pacing. These are common negatives. Conversely, for positives, designs or art overall is praised most of the time. Gill also certainly exhibits an outdatedness that a few people picked up on, though it's not something solely negative, as the series clearly evoked a level of nostalgia in people like Netic, who equates it to older works where a kid would go on an adventure and would use his obligatory catchphrase as he beats down bad guys, much like a 4Kids anime dub. Gill definitely possesses a certain vibe, and while this is something that makes the series feel outdated or somewhat boring, there is a charm to that as well. There were also a few comments that had trouble articulating much of anything concerning Gill, like Crash, who pops in to utter a variation of Gill's catchphrase, and to say that there's simply not much to discuss. Jin1 similarly had nothing to really say, but sent me a picture of his dog. What the dog doing? Ice Head Dog? Maybe it's a bit redundant to bring up people having nothing to say, but it's simply a series that doesn't elicit much emotion in people. And jumping off of that, I want to tackle Moronic, who brings up an interesting point about Gill's optimism. It's his defining character trait beyond Axes, really, and initially he's in a situation where he's the youngest and most optimistic person in his village, but this is challenged by the island folk around him. We even see him crying, like I mentioned before, alluding to more complicated emotions surrounding his character and mental state. But since this setting is abandoned early on, his optimism is barely challenged after this, even after being presented with the deaths of his friends, and while he barely knew them, it still didn't shake him much, so a certain blandness comes across in the emotional front, making the series feel a bit hollow. Shirt Frumpus is someone who found it hard to care about events going on, but did like certain aspects like the liches and artwork. It just didn't dig into these enough, so a lot of Gill lacked impact, like its deaths, power-ups, and its overall build-up. Joni also says similar things, finding it hard to care for the story and its characters due to the lack of focus. But they also bring up plenty of positives, like it having fun and distinct character designs, as well as Gill being cute, and also potentially a good candidate for a character who would be good at Fortnite.
Number 1 victory royale, yeah, Fortnite We about to get down. 10 kills on the board right now. Just wiped up Tomato Town. My friend just got down. I revived him and we're going southbound. Out of the park, we're going south. Sweet. Look at the map, look at the mark sheet.
Next, let's dig into a few of the more negative responses. I was surprised we didn't get more of these, to be honest, and most opinions seem to go from this middling, it's not bad, but it's not good either, to I have an irrational hatred of Gill, like Funky Green, who calls Gill boring and ugly, but he's just a little guy. Green also goes on to cite its poor pacing, boring characters, and it being derivative of other shonen manga as negatives, calling it a putrid waste of time. Melons is someone who went in with skepticism and calls Gill shallow as well as annoying. They also point towards the series fights being hard to follow and Gill's catchphrase as an annoyance. Legend of Ruiner comes in with a more focused complaint about how Gill's biggest issue is that it never tried to explore things, and I love the phrase, "it was a fundamentally incurious work," describing it as something that didn't really want to explain or give enough extra care to its settings or events, which I think does come across while reading. For examples, they bring up the Sister Lich in chapter 2 and how there's no attempt to save her or explore the notion of that any further. This is also something Palette touches on too by describing the writing as very, and then this happened. It lacks build-up or exploration, which hinders people's experience. While actually going through the summary of the story, it hit me how hard Gill is just, this thing happens, then this thing happens, oh you need to go to the troll forest next. It's like, okay, but there was no build up to this at all, and it makes Gill feel very on rails and not very interesting, so I completely understand these critiques from people. There are people who did enjoy Ice Head Gill despite all of this though. T-Meeks has a more mixed take but expresses that they wish Gill had more time to cook. We also had comments from Violent who, while had criticisms, describes Gill as a warm presence, making it easy to like him, and that his personality is a good contrast to the harsh world of Ash and Ice, something the artwork also mirrors. The characters are cute, which juxtaposes how ugly and creepy the liches can be. Lumi is someone who also mentions this, and I think by far they had the most positive review. They praise the artwork, say it had promise, think it has good ideas like the relics, liches, and most importantly, they say that the manga is an overall light-hearted and fun experience. I'm quite surprised at how positive the comments were, and I feel like people approach Gill in a silly but measured way mostly, and I admired the maturity it takes to approach a work and recognize some of its positives despite all of its shortcomings. It also makes me pretty happy that people like Gill as a little character. He really is just a little guy and he has an axe, so of course I'm going to be all over him. He's practically a mascot for Axed manga to me. So before we fully close out the video, I want to touch on one more response, and this is in regards to me titling the video as well as referring to Gill as the most axed manga to ever axe. Cactus states, an axe is an implement that has been used for millennia to shape, split and cut wood, to harvest timber as a weapon and... Well, that sounds like it's very Gill to me. He chops wood with his axe, he fights with his axe, and most importantly, he doesn't shut up about the axe, something I find very endearing even if most people didn't. His catchphrase is very goofy and it made me smile every time he said it, so I'm comfortable with Nightingale as the most axed manga to ever axe officially. I have this power as the head of the Axe Files Bureau. So while Gill might not be the most notable manga ever, it's still special in its own weird little axe focused way. This is one of the more recent axes from Jump, and maybe we're jumping the gun in covering it, as usually I like to wait a little bit more so authors can build up a bit of a catalogue of other stuff they've worked on, although Hachiya has published one more one-shot in Jump Giga's 2024 spring issue titled Ashimaru. From the limited info I can find on it, it seems to be about a ninja and it might have food elements involved based on the cover image it has. The fact that it has multiple color images and had a color page within Giga suggests to me that Jump overall are still banking on Hachiya to return and like his work. Before we fully end, I also want to bring up Hachiya's first one-shot I alluded to earlier, Seiryuu no Magoi. This one-shot is pretty lengthy at almost 80 pages and is about this boy named Goda who is known to be extremely violent and prone to getting into fights. This develops into a short story about the nature of violence, how someone can become violent through suffering abuse, and ultimately how someone can change for the better, especially if their environment changes. I actually think it's pretty well written, emotional, and it's an example of Hachia really knocking it out of the park in all aspects. They are an author who I believe can make a very good story, and I genuinely look forward to seeing what they make next and hope it's something more drama or character focused. And with that, this axe file on Ice Head Gill comes to a close, the most axed axe manga there ever was. If you enjoy this video, please leave a like, ring the bell, subscribe, whatever you usually do or want to do, and more importantly, if you want something similar to this, I have a whole host of videos covering other cancelled Shonen Jump manga on the channel. Other than those videos, I also cover manga generally and have a big focus on Weekly Shonen Jump and its history on the channel. Also, if you really like what I make here, consider supporting me on Patreon, which you can do for as little as $1 a month. If you do join, along with making me super happy, you'll get access to a bunch of exclusive videos and podcasts where I yap about other things, including my first impressions on some of Shonen Jump's newest manga. And if you want to go the extra mile at the $3 tier, you'll even get a unique little doodle to represent you in the end credits of my videos, like these cool people here. Thank you. Trinity, Jade, Kaizoku Gairu, Sorocool Zero, Holly the Apothecary, Mayu, It's Fako, Yellowtail, Lace Loggett, Crispy Bacon, Joe Henshin, Full Metal, Unquestionable, Yuzakura Psycho, Wurzel, Violent, Cactus, Joni, City Name E, Vina Burrito, Caffeine Dad, Cryonaut, Crash, 41IZ, Hong, Jamie Reynolds, Manu, Poke Emblem, James Miller, Jopa Monkey, Just a Virus, Star Sphinx, PK Broly, Fenrir Black, Elijah Espinoza, Neo Humanoid, Mark Nielsen, Electropirate, Jay Vasso, Three Frogs in a Trenchcoat, and at the $1 tier, Hilltop, Vaco Draws, Otaku Gamer X, Deadpan, Shy Monkeys, Jonathan Dragonet, John Sanford, Color, Jaime, Strawberry Prosione, Vaz, Palette, Ruiner, Juice, TG Talks Manga, Kuromi Knox, Eric Gorski, Miss the Shira, Gay Shark, Grizz Exploder, Textora, and Eni Oshowo. Thank you all so much for being patrons, and as always, thank you so much for watching. Remember to be kind and take care.